She knew what Halloran was the first day she walked into his office, and she took the job anyway. Nell Varda had grown up in a Hamilton foster home where the heating worked 6 months of the year, and the caseworkers visited 11 months out of 12. She had learned early that the world ran on 2 currencies: money and the willingness to pretend you didn't know where it came from. By the time she was 24, sitting across from Soren Halloran in a glass-walled office on the 31st floor of a Burrard Street tower, she had already worked for a payday loan operation in Mississauga, an investment firm that dissolved 14 months after she joined, and a property management company whose principals were currently 3 years into federal sentences. She had a gift for numbers. She also had a gift for survival, which is a different thing entirely, though people who'd never had to survive often confused them. Halloran had looked at her resume for exactly 40 seconds. She had counted. "You quit the property firm 6 weeks before the RCMP showed up," he said. "I did," she said. "Why?" The receivables column stopped making sense. He had looked at her for a long moment after that. He had grey eyes, not the romantic kind, the colour of a February overcast over the Lion's Gate, and they didn't give anything away. Then he'd slid a contract across the desk. 40 hours a week, 12 weeks severance if I end the arrangement. No questions about the receivables column, he'd said. The salary's on page 2. She'd turned to page 2, looked at the number, looked back at him. She had signed on page 4. 3 years later, Nell knew the shape of Halloran's empire, the way she knew the layout of her East Vancouver apartment, automatically, without thinking, in the dark. She knew which shell companies moved money through which port terminals. She knew the name of every customs officer who received a monthly envelope and how much was in each one. She knew the difference between what the legitimate logistics arm reported to CRA and what actually moved through the Centum container terminal on slow Tuesday nights, when the fog came off Burrard Inlet and the cranes moved like slow mechanical ghosts above the water. She kept 2 sets of books, the clean ones and the true ones. The clean ones would have impressed a senior auditor at a Big 4 firm. The true ones would have impressed a prosecutor. She was not proud of this knowledge, and she was not ashamed of it. Shame required the luxury of security, and Nell had not yet reached that threshold. What she had reached, somewhere around the 18-month mark, was a functional equilibrium. She came in at 8:30. She left at 6:15. She drank bad coffee from the machine in the second-floor kitchen because Halloran's last assistant had quit in January and no one had replaced her yet, and Halloran himself had never once touched the sleek Italian espresso unit sitting on the credenza behind his desk. It crouched there like a monument to beverages he was too controlled to ask anyone to prepare for him. Privately, Nell found this unreasonably funny. She had also learned by year 2 the precise architecture of his routines, the way he stood at the windows from 4 o'clock onward, watching the container cranes in the distance, as though repositioning them in his head. The way his jaw tightened, a single compact movement, when a number didn't reconcile. The way he would wait exactly 1 beat too long before responding when something deviated from what he'd expected. Not long enough for most people to notice, but Nell noticed, because Nell had spent 28 years reading rooms in order to survive them. She found over time that she was better at reading Halloran than she was at reading most rooms. She didn't examine why. On the Thursday that everything started to tilt, she left the office at 5:50. "You're leaving," Halloran said. He was at the windows, his back to her. He did not turn around. "I have plans," Nell said. She was already closing her laptop, sliding the day's folders into the correct stacked order. What kind of plans? Personal ones. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a man who did not often encounter information he hadn't been given in advance. Nell had catalogued the various silences of his office over 3 years, the calculating silence, the dangerous silence, the silence that meant he was letting someone believe they'd won a negotiation, and this one was different from all of them. She ignored it the way she'd learned to ignore most things that had no actionable answer. "The Pemberton logistics discrepancy from last Friday," he said. "I need it before Monday." "Already resolved," she said. "Highlighted in yellow, top of the folder on your desk, left side. Data entry error in the Weybridge records. I've corrected the source document and reconciled the variants." A pause. "Fine." She picked up her bag. She took the elevator. She did not look back, because she had learned in year one that looking back handed him information she'd rather keep. Fraser Tilden was already at the wine bar in Gastown when she arrived, slightly overdressed in a jacket he hadn't quite broken in yet, holding a glass of red with both hands, in the way of someone who hadn't decided what to do with them. He'd been in her evening continuing education course, Advanced Financial Modeling, 3 months ago, and he had remembered how she took her coffee by the second class without making a thing of it, which was the sort of detail that Nell, who had grown up learning to be invisible, noticed. They talked for nearly 3 hours. He told her a story about misreading a pivot table in front of a client, and she laughed. Genuinely, the kind that caught her slightly off guard on the way out. He asked about Hamilton, about growing up there, and when she told him the condensed version, the foster home, the heating, the sense of being a temporary arrangement in everyone else's permanent life, he didn't try to fix it or contextualize it or make it about resilience. He just put his hand briefly over hers on the table and stayed quiet, which was exactly right. Walking back to the SkyTrain afterward, she thought about how quietly the evening had settled. No calculations, no watching for exits, no reading the room. Just 2 people talking in a warm room while the rain came off the harbor outside. She had not had an evening like that in a long time. She had not had an evening like that, she realized, in 3 years. She noticed the first thing on Tuesday. Fraser texted her that the liability insurer for the commercial law firm his company worked with had abruptly cancelled their policy. An administrative disruption, he said. Inconvenient timing. She texted back that insurers were erratic and thought nothing more of it. The second thing she noticed on Thursday. Fraser's landlord had issued a 30-day termination notice to all month-to-month tenants, citing a structural assessment. He texted her apologetically. They'd been meant to meet for coffee that weekend, and she sent him 2 listings she found in under 4 minutes, because finding things efficiently was what she did, and told him to let her know if he needed help with the applications. She put her phone down on the SkyTrain home and watched the city blur past the window. The North Shore mountains were gone behind the November cloud. She sat very still for 4 stops. 2 things in 1 week. Nell was a forensic accountant who had spent 3 years inside an organization that manufactured adverse circumstances for its opponents with the same systematic care that other companies applied to supply chain logistics. She started thinking. She didn't look immediately. Impulse was a liability she had long since budgeted out of her operating expenses. She waited until Monday, until Halloran was in a call with the port authority that she knew from experience would run 90 minutes minimum. Then she opened the back-end reconciliation terminals, the ones behind 3 authentication steps and an access code she had memorized and never written down, because the filing architecture was hers, because she had built it, and because there was no lock she had constructed that she didn't also know how to open. She was doing routine maintenance. She told herself that. She found it on page 41 of a billing summary from the firm on Howe Street that the Syndicate kept on quiet retainer. It was buried between 2 legitimate transactions, the kind of placement she would have used herself if she were hiding a line item in plain sight, a 5-hour research and intelligence block billed to a numbered company she recognized immediately as one of Halloran's second-tier shells. The descriptive metadata, visible only through the filing backend she had designed, read Tilden F, background verification, financial exposure, tenancy structure, professional licensure standing. Nell sat with that for 1 minute. She counted. Then she pulled the rest of the thread. The liability insurer that had cancelled the Kitsilano firm's policy was a subsidiary of a national holding company. 2 board members of that holding company were names she had processed on documents crossing her desk in the past 18 months. The Canby Walk building where Fraser rented, the one with the sudden structural assessment, was managed by a property company that, traced through 4 numbered entities and a federally registered trust, connected to a man who held a 6-figure debt obligation to the Syndicate, the kind that got settled through favors rather than transfers. It had been executed in 4 days, quiet, efficient, and, if she hadn't built the systems herself, completely invisible. Nell printed 1 page. She highlighted 1 line in yellow. She used the same color she used when she needed Halloran to pay attention to something he would otherwise overlook. Then she walked across the hall and opened his door without knocking. He was on the phone. He glanced over his shoulder when she entered and held up 1 finger. The same finger, the same gesture, as every other time she'd walked in on a call in 3 years. She stood in front of his desk and waited. "The tariff structure isn't adjustable," Halloran said into the phone, his voice the same measured flat tone in every context. "If they want the Centum access, they pay the agreed percentage. If that doesn't work for them, Tacoma is a 2-hour drive, and I genuinely wish them well." He paused. "Handle it." He ended the call. He turned. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, assessing, economical, and then he looked at the page in her hand, and something shifted. The assessment recalibrated. "You look like you've found something I'm not going to want to discuss," he said. Nell set the page on the center of his desk. She placed it with the same deliberate care. She placed every document in front of him. She smoothed the edge with 2 fingers. He looked at it without touching it for a long moment. "BlackRock Legal," he said. "BlackRock Legal," she confirmed. "Specifically the intelligence and due diligence block billed to the Harwick Holdings numbered company on the 14th of the month. The subject name is underlined." Silence. His jaw moved, that single compact tightening. "It's a common name," he said. "It is," Nell said. "Less common is the overlap with the cancelled policy through Summit Assurance, which is majority held by Pacific Corridor Group, which has 2 board seats held by men whose names appear in my filing system, and the Canby Walk tenancy notice, issued by a property management company that traces, through 4 shells and a registered trust, to a man who owes you $260,000 in deferred interest." She paused. "I built those structures. I know the addresses." He picked up the page. He looked at it the way he looked at figures that weren't reconciling. Still and deliberate, working through it before speaking. He set it back down. "He wasn't right for you," Halloran said. She had prepared herself for a great many responses to this conversation. She had not prepared for that one, delivered in the same tone he used for port tariff schedules. "You don't know anything about him," she said. "He's a mid-level accountant at a Kitsilano practice," Halloran said. $37,000 in student debt remaining. Month-to-month lease because he's relocated twice in 3 years, which suggests he hasn't found the thing he's actually looking for. He plays recreational hockey on Sunday evenings in Burnaby. A pause. "I know enough." "You dismantled a stranger's professional relationships," Nell said. "Because he had dinner with me." "I complicated his immediate circumstances," Halloran said, a technical correction delivered without apology. "Nothing is permanent." "Nothing is." She stopped. She pressed her hands flat against the edge of his desk and looked at the underlined name on the page between them. "You don't have authority over what happens to people outside this building because of decisions I make on my own time. You pay me. You don't own me." Halloran looked at her then. The grey eyes, which were flat in every other circumstance she had ever observed, were not flat now. There was something underneath the usual surface, a controlled intensity that belonged to a man who had made a calculation and had not disclosed it to anyone, least of all himself. "You've never left at 6 o'clock, he said quietly, "in 3 years, not because you had somewhere you wanted to be. I've left for appointments." Appointments. Not somewhere you wanted to be. He set down the glass of water he'd been holding and didn't pick it up again. I was coming back from the Port Authority meeting. Frank drove down Cordova. The restaurant has front windows. He turned slightly toward the glass, toward the city. I didn't go in. The image arranged itself in her mind without her permission. Halloran in the back of a car, passing a lit window in the rain, not going in. She could not quite decide what to do with it. "You should have kept driving," she said. "I know," he said. The admission landed in the room and stayed there. "If I find out you've done this before," Nell said, "to anyone else, anyone I know." "I haven't," Halloran said. "I didn't want to know about your life before this. Knowing makes it harder to be rational." He turned back to the window, and she could see in the set of his shoulders something she hadn't seen before. Not a crack, he would never crack, but a seam. A place where the architecture had been under pressure longer than it showed. "Seeing you with someone else was the first irrational thing I've felt in a long time." Nell picked up her bag. "I'll have the quarterly reconciliations completed by Monday," she said. "After that, you'll need someone else." Nell. She was at the door. "The Tilden situation," Halloran said, and his voice had lost its management. It was rougher, stripped of the precision that usually coated everything he said. "I'll have it reversed by Thursday, all of it." His firm's policy reinstated, the tenancy notice withdrawn, everything back to where it was. That's not a negotiation. That's a given. She held the doorframe. "Why?" "Because you're right. He didn't do anything wrong." She left anyway. By Thursday, Fraser texted her that his landlord's notice had been withdrawn pending review, and that the insurance matter had resolved itself through what the company was calling an administrative error. He was cautiously relieved and thoroughly confused. He asked if she wanted to reschedule the coffee they'd missed. She told him she'd be in touch. She sat in her apartment in the November dark, 2 job offers open on her laptop, a senior role at a legitimate financial services company, a forensic audit contract with a Robson Street law firm, and looked at them for a long time. Both were good, both were clean, both led, in the direction she could see from here, toward a version of her life that looked, from the outside, like what she'd always been working toward. She had grown up being taught that safety was the only destination worth having. She had spent 28 years moving toward it. She also understood, sitting there, that she had never once in 3 years felt safer than she did in a 31st floor office on Burrard Street, keeping the books of a man who operated in the dark. Not because the darkness was safe. It wasn't. She had never pretended it was, but because she understood it completely. She had built its architecture. She knew every door. She knew herself better inside it than she did anywhere else. She picked up her phone. She didn't call. She typed a message to the number she had memorized 18 months ago and never used outside of office hours. "The Pemberton logistics intake from 2 weeks ago, I found a second discrepancy. Your quarterly projections will be off if it isn't corrected before month end." His reply came in 38 seconds. "My office, 8:30. She looked at that for a moment. Then she typed back. 9. I want a revised employment contract reviewed by my own lawyer before I sign anything going forward. And a raise, non-negotiable." The pause this time was longer. She counted. 20 seconds, 30, 40. "Fine." She set the phone down. She closed the 2 job offer tabs. She looked at the window, at the city lights coming up through the overcast, the mountains invisible behind the November cloud, the harbor somewhere beyond the dark. She walked into the office on Monday at 9 o'clock exactly. Halloran was at his desk, not the window, the desk, with the folders open in front of him in the way she knew they needed walking through, the yellow highlights illegible without her to explain what they meant. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her in a way that was different from 3 years of looking, or the same way read differently, now that she was no longer pretending not to notice what was underneath it. She set her bag on the visitor chair. She sat across from him. "The Pemberton discrepancy is on page 14, she said, opening her laptop. "I've cross-referenced it to the Weybridge records and the customs declaration. 3 places where the figures don't reconcile. He didn't reach for the folder. "Nell," he said. "The discrepancy can wait until after the contract review," she said. "My lawyer has a draft of the new terms. The raise is fixed. Working hours are capped at 55 unless you give me 48 hours notice, and I agree to the extension." She looked up from the screen. "Those are the terms." A pause, "And if I don't agree?" "Then I take the senior position at Crestmore Financial, which I've already been offered, and you find someone who can maintain your filing architecture without knowing everything I know about it." She held his gaze. "You'll find someone eventually. It'll take about 18 months, and they still won't do it as well." The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Halloran did not smile in any conventional sense, but a structural acknowledgement, something that functioned as recognition. "Send the draft," he said. She sent the draft. They spent the next 4 hours on the Pemberton discrepancy, working through it the way they always worked through things, efficiently, without wasted language, each of them tracking what the other was thinking before it was said. When the espresso machine needed operating, Halloran stood up and looked at it with crossed arms, the way he assessed port logistics problems, until Nell got up without comment and made 2 cups and set one exactly 2 inches from his left hand. He looked at the cup. He looked at her. He picked it up. "You should learn how it works," she said, sitting back down, "in case I'm not always here." He looked at her over the rim. "You're here." A statement. The same flat certainty he applied to shipping manifests and contract terms and the irreversible facts of his world. "I'm here," she agreed, "on my terms." She went back to the discrepancy on page 14. Behind her, she heard him move to the window, the familiar weight of his footsteps crossing the floor, and she did not look up, because looking up would have given him something she wasn't ready to give freely yet. But the room felt different. Not safe, exactly. Halloran's office had never been safe, and she had never needed it to be. It felt, instead, like a negotiation that both of them had finally agreed to stop pretending was something else. A ledger where the entries were being made honestly for the first time, the accounts laid open between them, nothing buried in the subtext. Outside, through the glass, the container cranes moved over the dark water of the inlet with their vast, patient arcs. Loading, unloading, keeping the count. Everything that moved through this city moved through them first, and they kept no record of what they thought about it. Nell kept records she always had. She had simply, finally, decided which ones were worth keeping.